Hey, boys and girls. I'm back to talk to you about the rest of Holy Week. Monday, or Sunday rather, we talked about it being Palm Sunday and how Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. We talked about how the people was praising and how they throw down the cloaks and the palm leaves, and they were so excited that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, and they were yelling, "Save, save us, save us!" That's what Hosanna means. So they were so excited that Jesus was coming, and they expected him to be their king, and they wasn't looking for him to be the Messiah. They just didn't see that. But we're going to start today. Like Monday and Tuesday was very busy days for Jesus. Monday is when he went into the temple and he overturned the money changers in there. He was mad because when he got in there, they were buying and selling and exchanging money, and he got very angry. And we know he turned over some tables and he kicked some people out, and he was really upset. And he told them that this house was a house of prayer. It wasn't supposed to be a house for money changing and for a den of thieves, and he was very upset about that. We know that the religious leaders got upset with him and wanted to know, by what authority are you doing this? They were trying to get Jesus to tell them that he was the Son of God, where they could say he was blaspheming. They were just looking for any reason that they could get rid of Jesus. That's what they wanted. They wanted rid of him. So Monday was busy for Jesus. Tuesday was kind of the same. He was at the temple a lot. And we know that by this time, it was mounting. The religious leaders really were bound and determined to get rid of Jesus by Tuesday. So the plot thickened, and the conspiracy started, and they were trying to get Jesus to say things to incriminate himself so they could holler blasphemy. Things started getting really, really hairy on Tuesday. Wednesday, the Bible don't tell us much about Wednesday, so the scholars kind of believe that it was a day of rest for Jesus and his disciples. They probably sat around and enjoyed each other's company. Jesus knew that his time with the disciples was fixing to come to a close, where he would be with them physically anyway. So I think he probably was just enjoying being with them. He was probably still teaching them, trying to prepare them for what was to come, what was fixing to happen to him, to prepare them to go spread the gospel after he was gone. But Thursday, we come to Thursday, and that Thursday really was really, really a tough day for Jesus. And I'm going to start out by reading about that day. And it says, on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples asked Jesus, "Where would you like for us to plan for you to eat the Passover feast?" Jesus replied to them, "Go into the city and you will find a man. Tell him that we would like to come to his house for Passover." First of all, what is the Feast of Unleavened Bread? What is the Passover? These are actually the same things. The Jews celebrated the Passover ever since the time of Moses, when the Lord saved all the Israelite babies. This was when the Lord passed over their houses and they were kept safe. That's another big story for another day. We know from that story that God told the Israelites to kill a lamb and to take some of the blood and to put it over their doorposts, their door facings, and that when he come over, that he would spare them. So that's why they call it the Passover, because he passed over their houses and he didn't let any harm come to them. It says, during the time of the Passover celebrations, the people didn't eat or have any other kind of bread in their homes with yeast in it. Yeast is what makes the bread all big and puffy. Without yeast, the bread is flat, and that's what's called unleavened bread. The disciples did just as Jesus asked, and they found a place and got ready for the Passover. The evening came, and Jesus and his 12 disciples sat to eat the meal. The disciples were eating quietly. I'm sure they all had a lot on their minds. They were worried. Some people wanted to kill Jesus since he was getting so popular. Jesus could see the disciples were worried, and he said to them quietly, I tell you the truth, one of you here will betray me. The disciples looked at each other in shock, and some of them asked Jesus, Is it me, Lord? Jesus replied, The one who dips his bread into the bowl with me will betray me. I will die just as it is written, but the man who betrays me will feel sorry forever. Then Judas, with his head down, spoke quietly to Jesus. It isn't me, is it? Jesus answered, Yes, you are the one. Judas's head went down even lower. He had hoped that the other disciples had not heard what Jesus said. Luckily, they were paying more attention to Jesus breaking apart some bread. He thanked God for the bread and shared it with the disciples and said, Take this and eat it. This is my body, which is given for you. Then he took a full cup, thanked God for it, and said, This is my blood, which will be poured out for many people so their sins may be forgiven. And they all took a sip from their cup. The meal continued after this. It was a long celebration. The disciples took their time because they enjoyed talking with Jesus and asking him questions. And that's where we get the Lord's Supper at. You know, once we become Christians, like we do here, we'll pass out the little cups with juice in it and the little small crackers that we'll pass around. And that's what we're remembering when we do that. We're remembering that little cup of juice that we're drinking. We're remembering the blood that Jesus shed on the cross for us. And every time we take it, that's what we're supposed to remember. We're supposed to remember that Jesus shed his blood and he died on the cross for me and for you and for our sins. And then the little cracker that we eat represents his body. And his body was broken and it was beaten. And we're supposed to remember what his body went through for us also. So that's where the Lord's Supper come from. So some of you are already Christians and you've already been saved, so you get to partake in the Lord's Supper when we do it. But that's what it's all about. That's where it comes from. It says, Jesus got up from the table sometime later and went to a different part of the room. He took off his clothing and he put something like a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a large bowl and he began to wash the disciples' feet. Then he dried them with a towel that was wrapped around him. This is something that servants usually did. Servants were the ones that usually washed people's feet when they come in from traveling or whatever they had been doing. That was just customary back in those times to wash their feet. So Jesus was taking on a role that was normally done by servants. And what he was trying to tell the disciples was, it wasn't necessarily that he was telling them, okay, you need to go out and wash other people's feet. But it was literally just, he was showing them how to be an example and to humble ourselves and how to treat other people and the kind things that we need to do for other people, how we need to love one another and take care of one another. That's what he was doing when he was washing the disciples' feet. But it says when Jesus had finished washing all the disciples' feet, he put his everyday clothes back on and returned to the table. And he said, Do you understand what I have done for you? Jesus asked them, You call me teacher and Lord, and that is who I am. And now that I have washed your feet, you also can wash one another's feet. After this, we know that Judas gets up and leaves. Jesus tells him to go ahead and go do what he set out to do. Judas gets up and leaves. Judas knows that Jesus will be going to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus and some of his disciples get up, and that's where they go. They go to the Garden of Gethsemane because Jesus wants to go there and pray to the Father. Jesus, when they enter into the garden, Jesus tells some of the disciples to stay there and pray, to wait and watch and pray. And Jesus goes further into the garden where he can be by himself with the Father and prays. He comes back and he finds the disciples asleep. So he tells them to wake up, that they're supposed to be watching and praying. He goes back in the garden and he prays some more. And Jesus was so overwhelmed, it said that his sweat was like droplets of blood because he was in so much anguish. This had to be a very, very tough time for Jesus because he knew everything that was fixing to happen. He knew all the bad things that was fixing to happen. He knew that Judas had betrayed him. He knew Peter was going to deny him 3 times. He knew he was basically going to be left alone shortly. But in that garden, it said Jesus prayed. He prayed for himself. He prayed that he would do the will of the Father, that he would bring honor and glory to the Father, that he would be obedient. He prayed for the disciples. He knew that they were fixing to be without him physically on this earth, and he knew what lay ahead for them. He knew how difficult things were going to be for them. He prayed for them. But it also says that Jesus prayed for those who would believe. And that's me and you. So when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was praying for everybody that would ever come to know him. So he was praying for you and he was praying for me that night in the Garden of Gethsemane. Instead of just focusing all on himself and all the bad things that was fixing to be happening to him, he was thinking about you and I. But it says the 3rd time he got up and went back out, the disciples was asleep again. They couldn't hold their eyes open. They were exhausted. So Jesus wakes them up again. And he tells them that the time is at hand, that the man that has betrayed him is coming. So we know then that while he was still speaking, Judas, one of Jesus' disciples, was coming towards them. He was followed by a large crowd of people carrying swords and clubs. Judas walked right up to Jesus and gave him a kiss on the cheek. This was a sign to the chief priests that this was Jesus and that he was the man that they wanted to arrest. Jesus let them take him, but one of Jesus' disciples didn't like what was happening. He wanted to stick up for Jesus, so he took out his sword and cut off the ear of a chief priest. Before the situation got more out of hand, Jesus spoke firmly enough, and he reached up to the man's ear and healed it instantly. Jesus spoke to all those around him. If I wanted, I could pray to my Father for help. He would send angels to protect me and stop this. However, I know this needs to happen to finish what is said in the Bible. The disciples didn't know what to do. They were afraid that they might be arrested for being with Jesus. They quickly retreated, leaving Jesus to be arrested alone. Peter was the only disciple that followed Jesus. He was careful to follow at a distance because he was afraid. He wanted to see what would happen to Jesus. Jesus was took to a man named Caiaphas, who was the high priest. This is where all the other important people had gathered. They were trying to find a reason to arrest Jesus, but he had never done anything wrong. People tried to make up bad stuff they knew wasn't true. Finally, Caiaphas asked Jesus, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" When Jesus replied that he was the Son of God, Caiaphas couldn't believe it. He even tore off some of his clothes because he thought what Jesus was saying was untrue. These people didn't believe Jesus, and that's when they decided that they would kill him. And we know then that Peter was outside trying to see what was going to happen. And we know within a small amount of time that Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 different times, just like Jesus said he would. He said, "Before the rooster crows 3 times, that you will deny me." And Peter was, "Oh, no, Lord, not me. Not me. I'd never do that, Lord." Well, when we're afraid, sometimes we'll do things that we normally wouldn't do. And Peter was afraid. But it said Peter, he was distraught when that rooster crowed and he realized what he had done, that he had denied Jesus, like Jesus knew he would. So what I want y'all to think about after that, we've talked about the Lord's Supper. We talked about Jesus washing the disciples' feet. We talked about how Jesus went into the garden and he prayed for you and he prayed for me while he was there. We talked about him being arrested, about him being betrayed by one of his own, the hurt that he had to have felt there for being arrested falsely. Jesus had a really, really tough day and night on Thursday. And the thing about it is, Friday is only going to get worse. So I'll be back to talk to you later about what happens to Jesus Friday.